North America's largest death care company has nearly $17 billion in future business under contract, but many of its customers are still alive. They have already selected burial spaces, caskets, urns, ceremonies, and memorials. They have signed agreements and started paying. Yet the company may not have to deliver many of those products and services for another 20 or 30 years. And if you wanted to buy a cemetery, this is where your calculation would begin. Not with the number of headstones, and not with the market price of the land. You would begin with the number of living people who have already promised that property their future business. This is not a bank or an insurance company. It is Service Corporation International, an operator with nearly 1,500 funeral service locations and 500 cemeteries. In 2025, the company generated about $4.3 billion in revenue and more than $542 million in net income. Its backlog of unfulfilled pre-need contracts reached $17 billion, almost 4 times its annual revenue. At first glance, this should be a struggling industry. Land in major cities is becoming more expensive. Approving a new cemetery is extremely difficult. More families are choosing cremation, and some are moving away from traditional funeral ceremonies altogether. But the largest operators continue to acquire funeral homes, cemeteries, and crematories. They are not buying in spite of those changes. They are buying because they understand something most people miss. The real product in this business is not a grave, and it is not even a funeral. The real product is time. The company sells a decision today, holds the relationship for decades, and delivers the service only when changing providers has become difficult, emotional, and sometimes practically impossible. To understand why that model is so valuable, you first need to understand what a family actually buys at a cemetery. When someone pays for a cemetery space, they usually do not become the owner of a piece of land in the normal sense. What they purchase is an interment right, the legal right to place human remains in a specific location. The land remains part of the cemetery. The family cannot separate it, build a house on it, or sell it to a developer. The operator continues to control the roads, landscaping, maintenance rules, memorial designs, and long-term use of the property. That distinction sounds like a minor legal detail, but it shapes the entire business. One space can create several transactions. First comes the interment right. Then the cemetery may sell the opening and closing of the grave, an outer burial container, a memorial, its foundation, engraving, flowers, and other services. If the same company owns a funeral home nearby, the package may also include transportation, preparation of the body, use of a ceremony room, a casket or urn, and many additional products. That is why large operators value combination locations, where a funeral home and cemetery operate together. Employees, vehicles, equipment, and administrative costs can be shared. The family can arrange almost everything in one place, which makes it less likely that they will compare each individual service with a different provider. From the outside, it may look like the sale of a single grave. Inside the business, it is a chain of connected products built around an event that cannot be canceled and is extremely difficult to postpone. The interment right is still the foundation, and once you look at it from an owner's perspective, a cemetery begins to resemble a finite reserve more than ordinary real estate. Imagine a cemetery with 20,000 spaces left to sell. If each space could eventually produce an average of $4,000, the future revenue appears to be $80 million. But that does not mean the cemetery is worth $80 million today. Those spaces will not all sell tomorrow. Selling them may take 40, 60, or even 80 years. Parts of the property still need roads, drainage, irrigation, mausoleums, and landscaping. Some of the proceeds may have to support permanent maintenance funds, and a dollar received 50 years from now is worth much less than a dollar received today. So an experienced buyer does not value only the acreage. The buyer studies the speed at which that land can be converted into sales. How many deaths occur in the surrounding area? Is the population growing or shrinking? What percentage of families choose cremation? How much inventory remains at competing cemeteries? And how much of the property can be turned into higher value memorial products? In that sense, a cemetery really does resemble a reserve with a limited amount of inventory. Instead of barrels beneath the ground, it contains future interment rights. That creates a strange contradiction. A full cemetery may look successful, but it is running out of the inventory that produces new sales. An empty cemetery may contain decades of potential value, yet fail to generate enough cash for years. Service Corporation International's 500 cemeteries cover roughly 36,000 acres. About two-thirds of that land has been developed. Even within the developed area, the company still has unsold interment rights covering roughly 2,000 acres. That is not simply land sitting on a balance sheet. It is a product shelf that may take generations to empty. Unlike most products, a competitor cannot quickly place a new shelf beside it. Cemeteries require large properties, significant capital, government approvals, and the trust of the local community. Service Corporation International itself describes the barriers to entering the cemetery business as high. But not every space has the same value. A cemetery can offer standard lawn spaces, locations near gardens or pathways, family estates, mausoleums, private crypts, and niches for cremated remains. The same acre can become either a basic product or a collection of limited, high-value memorial options. That means the value of a cemetery depends on more than the amount of available land. It also depends on how effectively the operator packages that land. A small family operator may sell similar spaces at similar prices for decades. A large network can introduce several pricing levels, train a dedicated sales force, offer installment plans, and combine the property with additional services. It is similar to a hotel where the same floor contains standard rooms, rooms with a view, and a luxury suite. The physical space may not be dramatically different. The price comes from location, presentation, scarcity, and the meaning the customer attaches to it. In 2025, Service Corporation International's cemetery operations generated about $1.9 billion in revenue and $644 million in gross profit. That is a gross margin of roughly 34%. This does not mean the company keeps 34 cents of every dollar as final profit. Corporate expenses, interest, taxes, and many other costs still have to be paid. But the figure demonstrates how profitable the system can become when land was acquired years ago, and each customer can be offered a package of related products. Even that is not the most interesting part of the model. The strongest tool appears when the operator sells a funeral package to someone who does not need it yet. The industry has two basic categories of sales. The first is called at need. A person has died, the family has only a few days to make decisions, and almost everything happens under emotional and time pressure. The second is called pre-need. A living customer selects a cemetery space, ceremony, casket, urn, or other services in advance, then pays immediately or through installments. From the customer's perspective, the logic is reasonable. Planning in advance can reduce the burden on the family, spread the cost over several years, and sometimes lock in important terms before prices rise. For the operator, the benefit goes much further. A pre-need contract turns a possible future buyer into an established customer. When the time finally comes, much of the decision has already been made. The family does not begin the search from zero. It goes to the company that already holds the contract, the selected property, and the payment history. Pre-need sales also make demand more predictable. The number of deaths can rise or fall from one year to the next, but a large portfolio of contracts gives the operator a clearer view of future revenue. At the end of 2025, Service Corporation International reported $17 billion of future revenue connected to unfulfilled pre-need contracts. That total includes trust-funded contracts, insurance-funded contracts, other arrangements, and amounts that customers have not yet paid. So this is not $17 billion of unrestricted cash sitting in the company's bank account, but it is an enormous line of customers who have already made a choice. That line may be more valuable than any individual casket, building, or piece of land. This is also where the real model becomes more complicated than the simplified version. A funeral company cannot legally take every dollar from a pre-need contract and spend it on acquisitions, dividends, or the owner's personal lifestyle. Rules vary by state, but significant portions of the money are normally placed into regulated trusts or used to fund insurance policies. The funds are supposed to remain protected until the promised products and services are delivered. The company may fix a price today, even though the funeral will take place decades later. During that time, wages, fuel, caskets, stone, maintenance, and nearly every operating expense may become more expensive. Without financial protection, a contract that looks profitable today could become a future loss. Trusts and insurance arrangements help manage that risk. The assets can generate investment income over time, helping to offset rising costs. When the contract is fulfilled, The operator receives the appropriate funds and recognizes revenue as the products and services are delivered. Certain rights to develop cemetery property may qualify for earlier revenue recognition, but funeral services and many products remain future obligations. Pre-need is not free money. It is a long financial bridge between a sale made today and an expense that may not arrive for decades. The larger the operator, the easier it becomes to manage that bridge. A national company can spread risk across thousands of locations, use centralized systems, oversee large trust portfolios, and estimate more accurately when contracts will mature. But if an operator begins treating protected customer money as its own cash, the bridge turns into a time bomb. For more than 15 years, National Prearranged Services sold prepaid funeral contracts across several states. Customers, funeral homes, and regulators were told that the money would remain protected in trusts or insurance policies until it was needed. According to the United States Department of Justice, the funds were not handled as promised. Money was directed toward unrelated debts, affiliated businesses, and the personal enrichment of company officers. Eventually, new customer money became a source of funding for funerals that earlier customers had already paid for. A system designed to preserve money for decades had turned into a massive scheme that depended on a continuous flow of new customers. When it collapsed, the losses exceeded $450 million. More than 97,000 customers in over 16 states were defrauded, along with hundreds of funeral homes and several financial institutions. In 2013, 6 defendants received a combined total of more than 36 years in prison. James Douglas Cassidy, identified by prosecutors as the leader of the enterprise, received 115 months. His son Brent received 60 months. The case matters not because every pre-need funeral company operates this way. It matters because it explains why trusts, insurance requirements, and regulatory oversight exist in the first place. The company is promising to perform a service at a time when the original customer will no longer be able to inspect the result. The family may discover a financial hole only 20 years after the contract was signed. In an ordinary business, an unhappy buyer can demand a refund. In this business, the person who made the purchase may no longer be able to demand anything. Most funeral homes and cemeteries in North America are still locally owned independent businesses. For a large corporation, that means the industry can be assembled one acquisition at a time. In 2025, Service Corporation International invested more than $100 million to acquire 22 funeral service locations and 2 cemeteries. The previous year, its spending on business acquisitions was even higher. The corporation is buying more than buildings and land. It receives a local name, community reputation, existing customer relationships, remaining cemetery inventory, and a portfolio of pre-need contracts. After the acquisition, the location can be connected to a larger system. Purchasing is combined. Accounting and marketing can be centralized. The business gains financing tools, a common customer database, and a wider catalog of services. If the company already owns another location nearby, employees, vehicles, and equipment can be shared. A small independent operator may struggle to finance a crematory, a new mausoleum, or a modern sales operation. A large corporation can spread those investments across an enormous network. By its own estimate, Service Corporation International controls approximately 18% of the North American funeral and cemetery market by revenue. That is a major position, but it is not a complete monopoly. The industry remains fragmented, leaving many possible acquisition targets. That is why a large operator can grow even when the total number of deaths barely changes. It does not need to create new demand. It can acquire existing demand and generate more revenue from each customer relationship. There is one change, however, that cannot be solved by buying competitors alone. In 2025, the cremation rate in the United States was projected to reach roughly 63%. By 2045, it is projected to exceed 82%. For a traditional cemetery, that is a serious threat. A full-body burial may require a grave space, casket, grave preparation, outer burial container, memorial, and continuing maintenance. Cremated remains require far less space, and some families take the urn home or scatter the ashes instead of purchasing cemetery property. The death still occurs, but the amount of revenue connected to it may fall dramatically. Cremation does not necessarily destroy the large operator. It destroys the old version of the product. That is why major networks are building crematories, memorial gardens, columbarium walls, family memorials, and premium spaces for urns. An area that once held only a few traditional graves can hold a much larger number of cremation memorials. The operator may earn less from each customer, but it can serve more customers on the same land. And if one company owns the crematory, funeral home, and cemetery, the money can remain inside the same network. For a small independent cemetery, making that transition may be too expensive. A large chain can finance it through scale. So the rise of cremation puts pressure on revenue while also accelerating consolidation. The threat becomes another reason to acquire weaker competitors. The cemetery business looks predictable because its ultimate demand is unavoidable. But the inevitability of death does not guarantee a profit. Land can run out. Cremation can reduce the average sale. Old sections must be maintained long after they stop producing new revenue. Pre-need contracts create obligations that can last for decades, and a mistake made today may not become visible until the next generation. The advantage of the largest operators is not that they discovered a way to make money from death. People have done that for thousands of years. They discovered how to manage the time between the customer's decision and the company's obligation. They sell a right to a limited space. They turn one property into a range of products. They secure the customer long before the moment of need. They manage protected funds and long-term contracts. They acquire local businesses together with their reputations and future obligations. Then they rebuild the old model around cremation without allowing the customer to leave the system. That is why the most important number at Service Corporation International is not the number of funerals it performed last year. It is not even the $4.3 billion in annual revenue. It is the $17 billion of future business already under contract. An enormous line of people who have selected a company for an event that has not happened yet. In most industries, a business constantly worries that the customer may change their mind tomorrow. Here, the customer pays in advance precisely so that nobody will ever have to make that decision again. That is the real economics of owning a cemetery. When you look at it as a buyer, you are not simply looking at land filled with graves. You are looking at a limited inventory of spaces, a network of future contracts and obligations that may continue long after the property changes owners. The cemetery does not sell land to the dead. It sells certainty to the living and earns its profit from the time between them.